Okay, what we're going to do now is take a look at switching from SQLite to using PostgresQL. And I've just come over to the Microsoft documentation for Entity Framework and the database providers. And this tells us the providers that are available that we can use with Entity Framework. And there's quite a big list. What you'll find that's missing from this is NoSQL databases. They've pretty much got all of the relational databases covered, but there isn't things like MongoDB in here. But there is support for SQL Server, of course, SQLite. There's also an in-memory database that's useful for testing. You've got Cosmos DB, PostgreSQL, of course, we're using that. MySQL, Oracle is supported, but these ones have paid, which means they're not free, of course. So if you're using Oracle, then you'll need to take a look at this. I've never used Oracle in my life, so I can't advise on this, but there's a few different options for Oracle DB, and then we've got other random databases as we go down the list. So a pretty comprehensive list, and what we need to do to switch to a different database server is install a provider for that database, change our connection string, and also change the provider in our startup class to use the version of the provider that we're going to use. So what we'll do is we'll head back to VS Code and we'll open up the NuGet gallery because we're going to need to install the provider that we need. And what we want to look for is npg sql.entity framework core PostgreSQL. And the version that it's on is 5.0.2 for myself, so I'm going to go ahead and add this to the persistence project and go ahead and install. And now this has completed. What we'll do next is we'll go across to our application service extensions where we've identified the DB context that we're using. So we've got services and DB context. But of course, instead of saying opt use SQLite, what we're going to do now is use npg SQL. And the connection string information will stay the same, but we are going to change this for a Postgres connection string. So we'll open up the app settings development.json. And instead of this connection string, we need to provide a Postgres connection string. And the way that we do that, we specify the server, which is running on localhost. We specify the port number, which is going to be equal to 5432. We specify the user space ID, and in my case I set this to admin. Then we specify the password, and I set this to secret. And by the way, just double check, because if you did use special characters inside your instance of Docker for your password, then just go and inspect, because it may well have changed because Docker doesn't support special characters and it does switch them for something else. So in my case, I just opted for a very simple string, which I can't possibly get wrong, and Docker isn't going to change to something else. But you can come in here and take a look at what this has given you for your password anyway. So back to our connection string, and what we need to do as well is specify the database. And in this case, I'm just going to call it reactivities. And we're all good apart from one thing, and that's if we go to our persistence project and we take a look at our migrations. Now, all of these migrations were provided by a SQLite provider. They will not work with PostgreSQL. And in the past, I have tried managing two different database providers inside the same application, and it just doesn't work very well. Microsoft do provide articles to say how it is possible to manage this, but it is just not worth the hassle. Unless you really desperately need to support two different database servers, one for development, one for production, then technically it's kind of possible, but it's really messy. So we're not going to do that on this course. We're going for clean. The course is about clean architecture, and that goes all the way down to our database as well. So we're ditching SQLite now, and we're going all in on PostgreSQL. So what we'll do is we'll delete the migrations folder, goodbye migrations, and move to trash. We've got them in source control if we needed to go back and look at the history, so it's not a big deal. And then what we can do is we can create a new migration using our new provider. So I'll just go back to the terminal and let's stop our application from running. And we'll ignore the warnings in there because we've been making significant changes. So I'll ignore those warnings, cd up to reactivities level. And what we can do now is say .NET EF migrations add, and we'll just say PG initial, and we'll specify -p for persistence and -s for the API. And when we press return, this is going to take a look at all of our code and create a single clean migration using the Postgres provider that we've just added. So I'll press return, and okay, I'm getting a small warning here telling me that my entity framework tools needs updating, but it's only a patch version older than the runtime. But just in case you see this warning on your computer and you're curious about how you do update this, then you can just say .NET tool update, and it's a global tool we're using. So we'll say -g, and then we can specify .NET-EF and press return. And this should go and update the tool to the latest version available, which should then match my runtime. And so it has. But what we're interested in is taking a look at what's been created in our persistence project in the migrations folder. And what we have here is a clean migration called PG initial, and this is going to be suitable for Postgres. Notice the different values that we have for a Postgres database rather than a SQLite database, and this is why we cannot use the same migrations that were created for SQLite as for a different database provider. And once upon a time, I think we're talking prior to .NET 3 here, by the way, it was kind of possible to manage two different databases on the same application, but nowadays it's really just not worth the effort. And we can use Docker to run Postgres very easily if we want to do so on development as well. So the next question is, does our application run? Well, let's take a look. Let's just close all of this down, and we'll open up our terminal again, and we'll cd into the API. And we'll clear our console, and what we'll do is we'll just execute .NET watch run once again and press return. And what we want to see here is, of course, our database being created and our seed data populated inside that database. And looking at the console, this looks pretty clean about what's gone on, and I'm not seeing any errors. So what this does suggest is that we've now got a Postgres database for our application. And if we go and take a look at the database itself, and we can do that if we go and get a VS Code extension for Postgres, and let's just search the marketplace for Postgres, and we've got a PostgreSQL management tool that gets 5 stars, or almost 5 stars I should say, so that sounds good, and we'll click install. And what we should have now is a new tab inside VS Code to help us manage PostgreSQL, and what we can do is we can just click on the plus and we can add a new database connection. So I'm going to say localhost and press return, and then we give it our user details, and I called my user admin and press return, and my password I called secret and press return. The port number is correct, 5432. We'll use a standard connection, and then we can see our database in the list, or we can show all databases, but I'm just going to select reactivities, and then we can give it a display name, and I'm just going to call it reactivities and press return. And what we should be able to do is take a look at our database, and we can see all of our tables have been created, and if we just select the top 1000, we can see that our Postgres database has been populated with our data. So we're looking good. Now there's one thing that we want to do before we move forward, and that's to test our application running on our new database. So I'm going to log out, I'm going to refresh the page. Our React application doesn't change because we've changed our database, but what we do want to do is make sure that we can log in. Can I log in as bob@test.com with the password? And I can. And we've lost all of our photos and everything because obviously we've got a clean database now. But can I click on the filters? And do these work as we would expect? And this does appear to be the case. Okay, and let's open up the console as well so we get a view of what's actually happening. And let's go and view future activity 2. I'll go and manage the event. I'll update the title and submit. And that functionality works as well. And I'm going to go to my profile. I'll edit my profile and just say hello and update profile. I'll go to the photos and add a photo and just drag a photo in. Make sure this functionality is still working as well. There's no reason it shouldn't do, but just to be safe, we want to make sure this is still working as expected. And we can see the photo there updating in different places. If I go back to the activities, can I still follow other users? And we don't see the photo live, of course. We discussed this earlier, but if I refresh the page, then we see the image for Bob. And can I follow other users? And yep, that functionality appears to be working. And we just want to go and make sure that Signal R is working. And I can see the connection information. But if I type in test and press return, then of course we can see the comment inside there as well. So please don't attempt to publish your application if you're not seeing all of the functionality working at this stage. It's much easier to find out a problem in development mode before you publish your application. So just double check that all of the functionality is working on your application. If anything is not working, now is the time to go and fix it. Because in the next lesson, we're going to take a look at setting up the Heroku platform for our use so that we can publish our application.